for many years. We know of your the qualities that you bring to this job, and I think you're exactly the right person for this job in a very dangerous and turbulent world. When I look at what you and the administration has done just in, I mean, it's May the 20th, January the 20th, President Trump was sworn into office, but just a few of the things that have happened during that time, obviously the critical minerals deal in Ukraine, the Pakistani-Indian conflict, which could have resulted in a nuclear conflict between two nuclear-armed countries, things back closer to where I live, the Mexican water deal that was negotiated with Mexico. I'm frankly amazed at your stamina and what you and the administration have been able to do in a short period of time. And listening to some of the criticism that I've heard this morning, it reminded me of a quote from NFL quarterback Aaron Rodgers talking about dealing with criticism, things he wished he had known when he was younger. And he said, never listen to criticism from somebody that you never would have taken advice from in the first place. But let me ask you specifically about two issues. One has to do with Ukraine and peace negotiations. I applaud you and the administration, and particularly President Trump, for initiating these negotiations between Ukraine and Russia and try to bring a peace, or at least a ceasefire, between these warring countries. This is enormously dangerous, as you know better than most, because it could easily spill over into the rest of Europe, result in NATO becoming involved and the like. But I wonder what you believe Mr. Putin's motivations are. Do you think that he is engaging in these negotiations in good faith, that he intends to give something in order to get something, or not?
Well, I think that's, on the question of Putin, I think that's still an open question. I think he approaches it, we have to assume, from a cold, calculated cost-benefit, nation-state evaluation of what's in the best interest of his view of Russia. What I'm pretty certain of is this is not the war he thought he was getting. When he first invaded Ukraine, I think he anticipated that the government would collapse and that he would be greeted as a liberator, and it has not turned out that way. And in fact, Russia today controls less territory than they did after the first 2 months of the war. So they've suffered significant losses. They've suffered the losses of at least, by some estimates, 250,000 men in uniform, and the Ukrainians have suffered less, but nonetheless suffered as well. It is a battlefield today in which the front lines move 10 kilometers at a time in one direction or another. Even if they're advancing at a tremendously high cost. But the challenge Russia faces now is their entire economy is built around the war effort. Their entire economy is built around munitions production and, frankly, around the fact that you've deployed about 1 million to 1.5 million people to the front lines, and they're making a lot more money fighting a war than they would in the private sector. So I think that that's potentially a challenge here in terms of bringing this war to an end. What we've tried to do is find any way forward to end this conflict. We think it is costly, it is deadly, it is disruptive, and we want to see it end. We want to see it end because of the destruction to Ukraine. We want to see it end because of the strains it's placing on the budgets of countries, neighboring countries, and the fears that it's stirring up in their regard. We want to see the conflict end in a way that's enduring, meaning not a peace that lasts 3 months and then restarts again, but something that's enduring, that both sides could live with for a long period of time without it restarting again. And that's hard. There's a reason why. This an effort that I wish would have started 2 years ago, but it's starting now. We've done the best we can because we are able to talk to both sides. Obviously, only one side is getting American aid, and only one side is receiving American sanctions. But nonetheless, we think it's important to preserve our ability to talk to both sides. The president is fully aware and has intimated on a number of occasions that he has options available to him in the sanctions field that he could pursue if, in fact, he determines that Putin is not interested in negotiating. But by the same token, I think the president is very committed to ending the dying, ending the bloodshed, ending the destruction, and he wants to preserve, as long as he possibly can, the opportunity to influence both sides towards peace. The minute you do certain things, your influence over one of the two sides to at least lead to peace really diminishes. And then we're back to where we were in January when he went into the White House, which is with no one had a clear path forward. I mean, there had been no... The first time Russians and Ukrainians have actually met directly and spoken was 3 days ago in Turkey. They had not spoken since the Istanbul process in 2022 had failed. So there are 1,000 prisoners that are going to be released from both sides from a humanitarian standpoint. That's good. What we haven't seen yet is moves towards peace. It's our understanding that the Russians are going to write up terms for what they would require in order to reach a ceasefire that then would allow broader negotiations. We await those terms, and then we'll have a much better understanding about Mr. Putin's calculation once we see what those terms look like.
So to quote you, the jury's still out.
These are complex conflicts, obviously, that are difficult to bring to bear, and there are a lot of other things playing at stake. But I do think that whatever offer Russia puts on the table, if in fact they do, as they said they were going to do, they put an offer on the table and say, if this happens, we agree to a ceasefire and further negotiations. I think that offer will tell us a lot about their intent here in the short term.
Well, I applaud your and President Trump's efforts to try to bring a ceasefire and hopefully a peaceful outcome to this terrible bloodshed, which has devastated both sides, the Ukrainians and the Russian people. Since you wear multiple hats, including as the archivist and Secretary of State, one of those that you wear is the National Security Advisor, and I want to talk a little bit about the Indo-Pacific and the threat that we face from a potential conflict there. I am delighted to hear President Trump repeatedly say he believes in peace through strength. And I think that is exactly right. I think that's exactly the right approach. But I worry that the United States and our allies are not ready for what could be a conflict initiated by President Xi as early as 2027, when he's instructed the People's Liberation Army to be ready to take Taiwan. General Douglas MacArthur said these words which sort of haunt me in this connection. He said, "The history of failure in war is almost always to be summed up in two words: too late. Too late in comprehending the deadly purpose of a potential enemy, too late in realizing the mortal danger, too late in preparedness, too late in uniting all possible forces for resistance." I don't believe we are ready at this point, but can you share with us your view and the administration's view of what we need to do in order to establish that deterrence that comes from peace through strength in the Indo-Pacific?
Yeah, in the most simplistic terms, we have to make the benefit of a Taiwan event for China, we have to make the benefit of it less than the costs. In essence, it has to cost more than what it's worth in order to do something like that, and deterrence is the key to that regard. And I think deterrence obviously begins with Taiwan's own self-defense capabilities. And the harder they are to take militarily, the more time I think they buy for themselves in that regard. I think it continues by having a credible regional deterrent, not just the United States, but Japan and other allied countries around the world, and an increased interest in the Indo-Pacific, by the way, from our European allies. I was at the NATO Foreign Ministers gathering over the last week in Turkey, and multiple member states raised their concerns about the Indo-Pacific and what it would mean for the European continent if there were a conflict there. So I think that also underpins why it's important. We have to understand that anytime there's a conflict in the Middle East or a conflict in Europe or what have you, that we have to dedicate resources and time to that. That's time and resources that we're not dedicating to the Indo-Pacific. We would like to be able to do all things everywhere, but the fact of the matter is there are finite resources and there's only 24 hours in every day. And so it would be of great benefit if we were able to conclude the war in Ukraine and with Russia and Ukraine, if we were able to establish some stability and peace in the Middle East. If we were able to deal with these issues, it would allow us to focus more time, energy, and frankly, resources on some of the challenges we face in the long term with regard to the Indo-Pacific and other parts of the world, but particularly the Indo-Pacific.